Certainly in the case of class involvement, if I can use that term, in the war effort, it certainly was transformative. It was the end of the Edwardian era. It was a time of great social change, of wide poverty, women's suffrage, the involvement of women in war work, and generally the change in social relationships across the entire spectrum. All of those impacted on Jewry. And I'll give you some examples of people who played significant parts, and I'll give you a few examples from the complete range of social life, Anglo-Jewish social life. But to begin with, to set some context, this was a war which saw the demise of 5 empires, or 4 empires really, and the birth of a 5th one. The British one is a bit vague, and we'll come back to that. But certainly the death of empires and the growth of one, the development of one, all of which impacted on the communities which are represented in this project, in this seminar, and in this Swansea project. There's no one in the communities which has not had its origin, more or less, in one of the events of this time. For example, it saw the death eventually of the Austro-Habsburg Empire, the breakup of the empire. Some 100,000 Jews fought on the German Austro-Habsburg, Austro-Hungarian side during the war. And indeed, when we were setting up this project and talking to the Heritage Lottery Fund, one of the things they found most intriguing, something which you would find quite normal, and that was Jews fighting Jews. There were some 55,000 Jews fighting on our side, either British or from what we now call Commonwealth countries, the dominions, the colonies, and over 100,000 Jews on the other side. So it was quite an astonishing effect. And we have, talking yesterday to somebody, we have examples of air crew from the Royal Flying Corps on the German side who were cousins, and they were in contact with each other. Clearly, the vast migration of Jews from these empire, Austro-Habsburg Empire, to the United Kingdom and to many of the communities we're talking about was really quite significant. It saw the end of the Ottoman Empire and the Jews in Arab lands. There was 190,000 Jews in Turkey alone before the empire began to fragment. There were great Jewish centers like Thessalonica with 60,000 Jews, Aleppo, which gave us the Codex. And of course, it led eventually to the Mandate, the Sykes-Picot, as everybody will know, most people will know, and eventually the breakup of the Middle East. It still resonates today. I found very amusing a couple of years ago watching the TV news. One of the ISIS terrorists was driving around in the back of his Jeep, screaming in quite good English, "Death to Sykes-Picot." I really do like a well-informed, literate, well-educated terrorist. It gives a good sense of historical perspective. So again, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire had a profound effect on Anglo-Jewry. Some of those Jews, of course, reached Britain, but if they didn't reach Britain, they certainly reached many other countries. Dramatic decline, of course, of the Romanov Empire, which began disintegrating before World War I, either side of the turn of the century, certainly from Alexander III through to Nicholas I. The impact on Jewry in the Russian Empire and the Romanov Empire was very great. British Jewry is largely composed of migrants from that disintegration, as it were. I'm very well aware, of course, that there were Jewish communities here long before that, Sephardi communities and communities going back into the 19th and 18th century. Of course I am. But I say that the majority of British Jews, and certainly in the communities we've been talking about, had an origin in the Romanov Empire's disintegration. It was, as you know, really one of the very large mass migrations of the time. The Italians, the Irish, etc., were all involved in the same. So it was not by any means a peculiarly Jewish migratory time. Loads of people were on the move, but certainly we were part of it, and we know that that migration included, of course, to the United States, which we'll come back to. It saw the end of the notion of the Staito, the romantic notion, as well as the not very pleasant notion of the statal existence, which we have as kind of rose-tinted spectacle view of. But if you go on our site and look at some of the photographs from the Staito, they were far from pleasant. They weren't very nice at all by way of existence. And of course, it saw the decline in this period, the slower decline of the British Empire, which didn't really fully decline, as it were, to maybe the end of the 1940s, but it certainly began the decline. There was another European war to be fought, there were other campaigns, but there was time for Britain to remake these colonies and dominions into what we now call the Commonwealth. But nevertheless, it is a period that was fundamental to us, gave us, of course, all the history of the Holocaust during the time. So these empires slowly or quickly declined, disappeared. But the one that grew and became profoundly important was, of course, the American Empire, the United States Empire. It became the powerhouse of world Jewry for most of the 20th century. It was an unprecedented time in Jewish life where there was no existential threat to American Jewry. There was involvement in science, arts, entertainment, commerce, etc. So it was a time where the epicenter of the United States for Jewry came about very quickly indeed. America, as we know, had a generally isolationist approach, and that certainly was the case for absorbing a large number of immigrants. But nevertheless, in a very short period, they all came flooding in. Not until very recently has the number of Jews, other than in Israel, other than America, I should say, been extended anywhere else. America, the largest Jewish community, until just a couple of years ago when Israel overtook it. So for all of the 20th century, America was the largest Jewish community and made a profound impact. So if we look at our site, we can exemplify some of these trends which I'm talking about. Our site is not a military site. It is a social history site which pivots around the First World War and tells the story of British Jewry around the First World War, both militarily and in terms of non-combatants. It's broken down into different structures, different portals, and I'll take you through several of these and exemplify the points I'm making. So if we look, for example, at our personal records, we have so far uploaded more than 2,500, nearly 2,800 personal records, and we're uploading them all the time. They are coming in from families, they're coming in from institutions, they're coming in from our researchers, they're coming in from a whole variety of sources. We collect as much information as possible, but we're very careful to say that we don't vouch for its veracity. One of the things which is very interesting is the extent to which the data, if you like, is very suspect at times because it's family legend as much as objective data. But here's an example on the site of a noble cause. Here was a lady, Lady Lever, born in Salford, married to one of the Jewish MPs of the time, and died as a result of septic poisoning while working in a nursing home in Hampstead. Indeed, such was her status, who's commemorated in York Minster. So here's one end of the spectrum, if I can put it that way, of engaging in the war effort and paying for it with your life. There was no reason for her to do this. There was no compulsion on her to do this. There was no other than a self-desire to engage with the war effort, which for her ended badly. But this is an example. If we look at another example, Charlotte, are you there? If we look at the other end, if we look at Robert Barnett, born Gallitzin, this was a tragic story. This is a story of a boy from Hackney, a very poor background, who is accepted by the Commonwealth Graves Commission as one of the youngest fatalities of the whole of the First World War on the British side. He was killed within 4 months of joining up at 15 years of age. People may know that there was a big scandal of the time called boy soldiers, where unscrupulous recruiting sergeants signed up anybody who was probably over a meter tall. Whatever age they said they were. There was no validation, no verification. As far as we know, Gallitzin was involved in a family argument, blazing family argument, one that you would imagine 15-year-olds have and have had from time immemorial, stormed out of the house, I'm talking figuratively, stormed out of the house, got picked up by a recruiting sergeant, signed up, off he went, and he was killed 4 months after he joined up at the age of 15. A very high price to pay for a family argument. But an example, if you like, of the other end of the spectrum, a family which wanted to probably avoid the war. Certainly in 1915, when he joined, there was no conscription. 1914, there was no conscription. It was voluntary. Conscription didn't come until 1916. So it was relatively easy to avoid being captured, as it were, being enrolled, as it were. So it was voluntary. But he did join up, and there you are. So that's one end of the station, Barnett at one end and Lady Lever at the other end. Again, if you go through other examples, this is a man called Bergson from Bradford, served with the Canadians. And there you see the situation. He given a week's leave to marry. In Bradford, he had gas poisoning. He got married in Bradford. He had gas poisoning at the time, wounded in the right leg, but sent straight back to the front the day after his wedding. So here's a man who, an interesting guy from the provinces, served with a foreign military, whether or not he came in through a Canadian connection or he was just lent across to British colony forces. Forces were exchanged, and his family has uploaded his story. So another example, Charlotte. Here's an example now of a history window. Now, a history window is one of the other aspects of the site. It tells in vignette form, 1,500 words, events of the First World War period. These we do vouch for. These are written by historians or specialists in the subject, or people with good knowledge. The ability to find these history windows very much depends on interests that people have and things that we find out. Many things which are really lying undiscovered, and we want to include them on the site because, as I said, this is not a military site, but is a civil site. So this is the case of Sylvain Dreyfus, yes, a relation to the family France. By the way, we cannot verify it, but we believe that Mr. Dreyfus, in creating his chemical company, used some freelance labor that he managed to find. One was a Mr. C. Weitzman, who was a chemist in Manchester at the time, and was probably looking for a few bob, as we would call it, and worked at the chemical works. Chemical works were located wherever they're located, and in June 1917, it had by then been turned into a munitions factory, from being a general chemical factory into a munitions factory. And in June 1917, it blew up in the center of the town. 46 people were killed, including a school, local school. 2 years ago, and 3 years ago now, in 2017, there was a memorial service at the site, and the site is, of course, still very well commemorated. So again, you can look at that as an example of a history window. There's about 80 or 90 of these. They're kept short, they're kept very tightly written. It is not intended to be a site for historians. It's a site for the general public. But it gives you links, and if any historian's got particularly a relatively unknown story, we'd love to hear from them. We pay a very large fee for writing these, which is a mark of appreciation. That's your fee. But it gets stories out there of the time. Something else, Charlotte? So here's another example of a history window, but this time in video form. We have videos. This is a very rare video, which we obtained from British Pathé. It tells the story of a siege in London in 1911, the siege of Sydney Street. Very rare footage. Anarchists raided a jewellery shop in Houndsditch in West London, took fright. I'm always interested, by the way, in this young girl here. She must be today somebody's granny. But here's the police arriving, mob-handed, all to chase down these 3 anarchists who are hiding in this shop. These are examples of the Royal Scots Greys, who were sent for from the Tower of London. Such was the threat to the city. They arrived with their Maxim gun, and here they are running, literally running from the Tower of London to Houndsditch, and here arrives the cavalry. In a short moment of time, you'll see their Maxim gun. So an extraordinary episode. They are extraordinary sort of episode. Why this great kerfuffle? Well, you'll see in a minute why there's great kerfuffle. The video will come on in a minute. Then the troops are firing at the murderers in Sydney Street. This is where they're holed up. Eventually the building caught fire, and whether they were shot or whether or not they were burnt alive, who knows. It's the very first example of an outdoor new movie. Here's why it was such a thing. Mr. Churchill, you can see in the top hat. Oh, you'll see the top hat on the left side. It turned up. He was Home Secretary. Churchill was never one to miss a publicity opportunity, never one to miss the opportunity to take charge of the situation. And here he is. He was the one who called the army in. The police could have handled it, but he didn't. So here you are. Here's the example. By the way, I've always said I want one of these fire engines for my Hanukkah present. They're absolutely magnificent engines. But rare footage. When we show this footage to children, by the way, they have 2 reactions. The film was taken in 1911. The children have 2 reactions. Sir, 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 why is it not in color? Well, there's spoiled brats for you. And sir, 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 where's the sound? Well, yeah, well, it's 110 years old. It doesn't have sound. But there you are. We have several other videos on the site, including from Allenby's entry to Jerusalem, the Petticoat Lane, and so on. So we'll move on. So that's another example of history window of another type. We move on, please, Charlotte. So now we come to collections. Now collections are very important to us. This is a very rare diary. It came from somebody from St. Anne's, if anybody's from the St. Anne's area, donated by the family. And again, there's the link where you can see it. Collections are for us a really important thing to be doing because so many of them are at risk. These are largely provided by families, descendants of, obviously. We have no first generation, so we're talking about the second, third generation, who have, of course, been very badly affected by COVID-19. We are very concerned that some of these collections are even more at risk. And the families don't know what to do with them. don't know what to do with these collections. They're desperately anxious not to throw them away, but don't know what to do with them. Unfortunately, many of them are at risk of being thrown away because people are impatient with this kind of stuff. We have saved some real stuff. Now, we are only interested in the digital copies. The originals go to libraries or archives. We work with the families as donors. Where would they like the diary to go? So one example, I worked with a lady who was second generation. It was her father who fought in the war, who suffered from what we would call today post-traumatic stress, not then, of course, and worked his way through it through to 1924 by rambling. And he became very active in the Rambling Club and left this most fantastic diary, which is on the site. And his daughter didn't know what to do with it, and we talked through it with her, and she eventually said, I'd like it to go to the Rambling community. So I phoned the librarian, the archivist of the Rambling Association, who fell off his chair, and I said, if I give you a 100-year-old diary, do you promise to keep it, look after it, treasure it? He said, my chairman and I will go and see the lady. And the diary is there, the original, but it's of no use because it's there, locked up, very precious, very fragile. But historians can now see it online. And the facility, when we talk about the site and how it operates, the site has everything in collections, page turning, Zoom software, everything. There are many of these collections to look at. If we look at another one quickly. Right, so we now move on to the memorial wall, and I sort of conclude with there. Memorialization is very important to us, as it is to the Jewish community generally. And as a personal record is added up, as I say, we have more 2,500 of them now, the software automatically creates this memorial wall. If any of you have seen the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington or the Holocaust Museum in Paris or whatever, this is a digital memorial wall. I don't think we can show you this on the presentation because of the nature of technology, but if you were to click on any one of the 2,500 triangles which are shown there, you'll go immediately to that personal record of the person. And the software, when we have it, stores the date of death. Sometimes we don't have a date of death. And the software automatically converts the date of death from the civilian date of death to the Hebrew calendar date of death. And where we have a person being loaded up by, say, a family, therefore there's an email, we send out a memorial reminder. People may know the term Yortzeit reminder, memorial reminder, 28 days before and 7 days before the date. This is done automatically by the Hebrew date. We are inundated by emotional emails every time we do this, because people say, I didn't know anything about this guy. Who is this guy? What do you mean he died? Who is this? What do you mean I need to commemorate? Who is he? And it produces an incredible cathartic reaction. And people are indeed memorializing these people. They are indeed lighting a candle now. So many of these people have been lost and are now being recovered. So the site is a very complicated site, a very complex site. It tries to show everybody who's involved. The range of people involved is without reference to class, or we assume, we know that the range of people involved was very extensive, very comprehensive. I've given you 2 examples. There are many, many more. It tries to capture their individual stories, tries to capture stories around events of the period, and tries to capture collections, digital collections of materials, including very, very rare things, very rare things. And they're all there now to be seen, all available to resources, researchers doing research, families, and so on. So let me stop there and then take any questions, if I may.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was fantastic. And a great overview of the work being done on the site. And I think highlighting such a diversity of stories is really fascinating and showing many different sides of the war experience. Quite a few questions have come into the chat, which I'm going to run through in order in which they were posted. The first question that I can see comes from Trish Skinner, who asked, among the stories as a whole, what proportion of them relate to women? And are all of those that relate to women in turn related to nursing activity? Or are there other examples of female stories, say?
Yeah, the general point is that women's stories are particularly important to us because they're the most difficult to get at. The men's stories generally have some kind of military line we can follow. A lot of the stories can be validated in something called the Jewish Book of Honor, the Book of Honor of 1922, which is digitized on the site. So people can, it's the first time the book was ever digitized with a search facility built in. It's not entirely an accurate record, but it's an incredible achievement. I won't detract from that. Women's stories come at us from a whole variety of different sources. No, they're not all nursing by far. We tell a wonderful story, for example, of a woman who had 13 children, was desperately anxious to get her husband exempted from the military. And at Tower Hamlets in London Library, there are the World War One, well, some of the World War One records for exemption applications. And there she was trying to make an application for her husband to be exempted. Remember, in those days, there was no social services, no welfare services, no national health services, etc., etc. If the breadwinner copped it, it was a serious situation. The application for deferment or exemption was not granted, so in he went. We don't know what happened to him. We couldn't find out what happened to him. We couldn't find out what happened to the family. We have stories of women doing war work, which is extremely important. We have a story of a woman on the Western Front as a motorcycle dispatch rider, which is very rare. The story is not rare, but the images and so on are rare. Stories of, well, not validated, but a story of a woman spy, which I'm still trying to get validated because it's really a very good story. Again, there are stories of women spies, but this is an unknown story, which is what we're trying to get at. The known stories are the known stories. So no, not at all. Nursing was, there were 4 nursing corps, and many women went in through nursing operations because they were easy to access. But not at all. One of the ones that we particularly enjoy, and again, it's on the site, just to give you an example, is a young woman who, by any record, was very clever. She could read and write Yiddish. Most women could just speak it, but she can read and write it. Now, people who know the period of time will know something called DORA. Do you know DORA? DORA was the Defense of the Realm Act, which, put simply, was the act of Parliament that allowed them to shoot you first and apologize afterwards for getting it wrong. And in the Whitechapel post office, there was the military censor's office, which was part of DORA. And this woman was there as a censor, and the soldiers were told to write their postcards in English. Of course, they couldn't. So they wrote their postcards in the address in English, which is not a very long address in those days, but the greetings usually in Yiddish. Because either women could read it back home or someone wrote it, translated it for them. So the story is told that the military got very agitated about this because they didn't know what all these postcards were saying, called in people like Wistowski, and she assured them that the message on the back of the postcard wasn't secret code, such as, you know, German submarine coming up the Thames on Tuesday, but was more like, dear Rebecca, keep the cholent home, I'll be home next week. They didn't quite know what cholent was and whether or not that was code word for a submarine. But no, loads of women's stories, more the merrier. If you can lead me to German stories, this was great.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alan. You sort of preempted the next question, which is posed by Tony Griffiths, who asks about the editing process involved with some of the material that's sent to you, and wants to know whether everything shared is as it is sent to the project or whether there is a selective or editing process, and asked whether maybe you could share an example of one of the records you described that maybe had suspect information or family legend that was sent to the project.
Okay, I need notice to search the record. I didn't anticipate that question. I certainly can do it after the session for sure. But I'll give you a real example. We had a record up on the site, which the family were very proud of. And post-event, as it were, post-loading, they turned up at one of our public events with the medals, which they hadn't uploaded, and said, this is the medals from his campaign and so on, which our historian said, I do have a slight problem here. Are you sure these are his campaign medals? Oh, yes, these are his campaign medals. Okay, well, what you said on the site are not these campaigns. So if he fought on the campaigns which are on the site, he must have bought these medals for 10 shillings in Petticoat Lane, which did happen, by the way. Or if these are his medals, then the information on the site is wrong. But we can't have it both ways. That's an example. That is why we make quite clear that in terms of uploading personal records, we take what's given, because this is family legend. And first of all, you really don't want to get involved in disturbing that. And it's quite useful in itself. But we don't vouch for its veracity. If you tell us it's true, it's true. Regularly, and I do mean regularly, the material is updated. What is most difficult is when the families disagree. We had a very dramatic example very early on, where one cousin was very keen to supply information on a history window we were doing in conscientious objectors, which was at the time quite a phenomenon. And there were many Jewish conscientious objectors. And this family member wanted to put up a great uncle, put the story up. Within a matter of weeks, a complete World War III broke out because other family members were too ashamed of him, wanted to disown him, and wanted the reference taken down. They did not want that record to appear anywhere in the public domain. Now, we were in the Solomonic position because it had been two legitimate family partners, as it were, two sets of cousins. And we said, look, it was put up by one cousin, one descendant, and now another descendant wants to take it down. We, for our part, don't want to cause any family distress or any family rift or anything like that. But I'm afraid you two have to sort it out. And whatever you two decide, we'll comply. They took it down, or we took it down at their request. So 100 years later, it's still raw, and people don't particularly want to know some of the truths which are undoubtedly around. But yes, we can do that. On the history windows, on the other hand, it is very clear cut. It has to come from a reliable source, usually a historian, frequently PhD students, because we say to schools, you can rely on this information. So if you're doing a project with primary schools or secondary schools, we're very busy at armistice time, for example. We say you can rely on it, use it for teaching purposes. We equally say don't rely on the personal records. Most of them are okay, but some of them could be deeply dodgy. But that's how we do it. On the collections, that's easy. We control that ourselves. We are very tightly control that ourselves, mostly because we're working with precious items, and mostly because we want to work with state archives or museums or local collectors, so on. So we control that ourselves.
Super, thank you. Following on from that, could I ask, has there been any pattern to the times when you found you've been deluged by public inquiries or public offers of records or stories? Have they sort of aligned with particular anniversaries or particular things being prominent in the media or anything like that?
Yeah, there are two answers to that. One is public events. Armistice was obviously busy. Last armistice was very busy. Catastrophic national events have been making us very busy, like lockdown. Everybody's doing various things. Genealogy has kind of gone through the roof, and we've gone through the roof. We also internally have a system of newsletters, which we send out about every quarter, roughly. We have a mailing list of about 3,000 plus. If anybody wants to join our mailing list, delighted. And that causes an incoming avalanche. The last one, which I just dealt with last week, was somebody trying to trace a Jewish man, Leon Oppenheimer, if anybody knows him, Lehman Oppenheimer, who was a famous rock climber. He was a famous ceramicist in Manchester, and his hobby was rock climbing. And I was contacted by the Cumbria Rock Climbing Association. Did I know such a thing existed? Who were trying to research Oppenheimer for a book they were trying to do on the climbing of Pillar Rock. This project has educated me about things I knew nothing about. And what could we help them with about Lehman Oppenheimer, please? And we had a lot on Lehman Oppenheimer. Someone gave us a great deal on Lehman Oppenheimer, and I read it with great interest. So there was an example of I think a professional researcher, because he was writing this book on the Cumbrian rock climbing, or examples of or other examples. One area which is quite interesting is that we clearly talk on British forces, whether it's naval or the Royal Flying Corps as it was, or the army units, but we have German soldiers uploaded. If that soldier ended up in the UK, or his family ended up in the UK. So to give you an example, as a soldier loaded up who got the Iron Cross, serving in the German Navy during the First World War, and ended up dying in Epsom in 1957 in a care home, having survived Theresienstadt, because the guard at Theresienstadt was in the same naval battalion as him, so looked after him. And he made it not to a death camp, but made it out back to Germany, and then essentially to the UK. And his family have uploaded his story, and including images of his binocular case with a bullet embedded in it, which saved his life when he was shot at. And they have all this stuff. And even their own family was unaware of some of this stuff, and they were now sharing it through the web. So yeah, that's how it works.
Great. So Michael Tobias has asked, and you did touch on this already, have you included on your site all those listed in the British Jewry Book of Honour? And maybe perhaps you could say a little bit more about that.
Okay, no, because there's about 55,000 names. But what we have included is the Book of Honour. As I said, one of the first things we did was obtain funding to digitalize the Book of Honour, which I have to tell you is about 1,200 pages. It's a massive job. When I first presented it to the imaging house in Southampton saying we want to digitize and upload this, they just looked at me as if I was mad, because every time they turned the page it fell apart a bit more. But they did it. And the second thing we did was attach a search engine, a page turner, a Zoom facility. So if anybody's particularly interested in the Book of Honour, they can go to the site, search personal records. If they go down, they'll find the Book of Honour. They can read the Book of Honour just by page turning. And if they want to find a name, they just go into the search facility and find the name and hope for the best. If you put in Abraham Cohn, you'll get about 150 answers. So try and be more specific. But if you cannot be specific, you have to work way through the listing. The records are always said to be not wonderfully accurate. There's large omissions. People often say, but my great uncle served and he's not in the Book of Honour. Yeah, well, you have to go back to the editorial committee in 1920 to discuss that. Don't discuss it with me. But we know it's inaccurate, but it is an incredible manual human achievement. we are much hampered by the fact, really bad luck, that the main record center for the First World War was a building which was destroyed in the Second World War Blitz. So original records were destroyed, which of course from our point of view, or any historian's point of view, is a kind of nightmare scenario. But nevertheless, we have the Book of Honor. We have not loaded up 55,000 names, but you can go search, and if you want to upload your family member, please do, or contact us and we'll help you.
Great. So there are a number of other questions that have appeared in the chat. One suggestion has been made that a demo of the memorial wall could be done if we have time. So I know we have around 15 minutes remaining. So what I don't know how long a demo of the memorial wall might take.
Okay, Ed, did you say we can access the memorial wall on this software?
I can do this now for you. So I'll just share the screen.
Great. I'll show you what I didn't know we can do it in this software.
It's not a problem. And there we go. So
okay, well, this is
I think we can do it.
Okay, let's have a go. So
there we go.
Controls all the. So hang on, before you do that, can you cancel that?
Oh, that's a good question.
All right, fine. Okay, so
no, hang on. No, we'll do it. Don't worry. There we go.
Okay, so here's the triangles. You scroll down. If there's, I'm trying to find, it's not so easy. So if there's no photograph, there's just a blank triangle, which makes it much more difficult. But everybody gets kind of triangle. If you randomly pick somebody, so randomly pick somebody. Okay, he's picked Arnold, who was 1889. We knew when he was born, but we don't know when. We know when. Sorry, he was born in 1889. We have a definite date of death. So if we now go to his personal record, here you have what I was saying before. Someone is loaded. Hang on, before you scroll down. So he was born in 1889. We don't know when, but he died on the 15th of August, 1917. We do know that. And we'll have an official record somewhere which says that. That date has been converted from the civil date to the Hebrew date by the software. If you go down, he was born in Blackpool. There we are. That's handy. He's given a unique reference by us. There's only one of him in the whole system. He was killed in Ypres. He's buried in Perth Cemetery. This is his family. It was a small family. It only had 3 siblings. He lived in Willesden. He was born in Blackpool. He lived in Willesden. He was in the army. He enlisted in 1914, so he enlisted as a volunteer. He was a second lieutenant, killed in a shell explosion, and so on and so on. This is who he worked for before he was obviously a trainee solicitor. He was a member of Brondesbury Synagogue. And if you go on down, you see his excerpt from the Roll of Honor. So here was somebody who's asked about the Roll of Honor. Here's the page from the Roll of Honor, which lists him somewhere on that. It would have to be looked at. Here's a map which shows his personal journey from Blackpool through to London, through to his death on the continent, and so on. Somebody has loaded up a memorial for him from the Jewish Chronicle of 1917. Someone's loaded up a personal memory of him. Alfred served with his unit in Ypres. While returning from a briefing, he was killed instantly when a shell exploded near to him. He died just 2 days after receiving news that his second son had been born. Oh my God. And he was reported in very high spirits. Isn't that terrible? His son, Alfred had 3 sons. One son, Bertram, served with his father, served like his father in the Second War and was killed, oh God, as memorialized with his father in a park near to where he was killed. So not a very nice story, really. So if you go back up a bit, you can see here, Commonwealth Graves Commission, second lieutenant, London Regiment, where he's buried, grave reference, and any personal inscription that's on the stone. So someone has put a lot of material into this man, a lot of effort into this man. Someone does not want this man to be forgotten, which is great, of course. This is a particularly poignant one, as you can see, his own death and the death of his son in similar circumstances and so on. Another example, if you want, Ed, I don't know. Was through randomly. Okay, so just randomly pick. See if we can pick a woman. See if we can pick a star. We'll see if we pick if we can. It's a bit small, but see if we can find a woman somewhere. Find a woman somewhere.
As you say, a bit small.
Yeah, if not, not. Let's see if we.
Oh, wait a minute, I found one. Yeah.
Okay, there we are. Leo Gottlieb. Here's an interesting example of somebody who survived the war, because we shouldn't imagine everybody died in the war. So she was born in, we have a date of birth, 3rd December, and date of death. Her maiden name was Joseph. She was born in Poland. Her husband was Chaim. She was a homemaker. She died in London of thrombosis, apparently, buried in Enfield. And go on down. Here she traveled from Poland to London. Her and her husband went to the cinema a few times a week. So very nice. An example, if you like, of the difficulty in getting data, hard data on women. Whoever uploaded this didn't have a lot more data. It would have been good if they, this may have all they've got, I don't know. So I don't criticize it in any way. But it was randomly chosen, and this is an example. And since we have a date of death, an exact date of death, 29th of November, 21st of Kislev, about a month before 21st of Kislev, we'll be sending out an email to whoever uploaded this to give them a memorial date, a memorial event coming up.
That was fantastic, thank you. And I think the memorial wall really, again, demonstrates the many different experiences of people during the war. And a number of comments have shown just how, I think people have commented about how the first one in particular is just a heartbreaking entry. I want to just pose a question which has been put as well, which I think is an important follow-on from that. There's no name attached to it, but someone has asked or said that they would like to send their grandfather's war diaries, POW camp photos, medals, etc., to be preserved after their death, and wants to know how to go about doing that. Hi.
So again, sorry, I got.
Hi.
Perhaps you'd like to pose the question yourself in that case.
Yes, I've got my grandfather was wounded on the Somme and taken prisoner, and I've got a lot of letters that he wrote to my grandmother, and a journal that he wrote while he was a POW in, I don't know what country he was in, when he was, I don't know if he was taken to Germany or somewhere else. But he was with some Newfoundlanders, and anyway, I've got these documents, and I wonder whether to send them to the British Museum. I've put them in my will that someone should send them, preserve them and take them to the British Museum with his medals. Is that the right place to send them?
I usually answer that question, which is posed quite regularly, is to have a longer conversation with you as to what interests you and the family. So the options, for example, are the British Library if they're diaries, or the British Museum, or
I can't hear that.
The British Library.
Frozen.
Okay, you there?
British Library. I'm the last person who's interested in them.
Okay.
My daughter's not interested.
So it's very important we capture this, because your daughter might do something, short-sighted, shall we say.
Well, I put it into my will. It's in my will.
Okay, well, they can go to a variety of places, including the British Library, British Museum, regimental museums, local museums. We have stuff going to all sorts of places. We did a very large project with the Fusiliers Museum in February, just before lockdown. They're very keen. So, what regiment was he in? This kind of thing.
Well,
so
he had to change regiments several times because they were decimated.
Yeah.
That's
quite common.
You know how only a few people left, and they put the survivors in with another regiment.
That was quite common, very common that people.
Yes.
So I think if we have a longer conversation after this Zoom, we can help direct you in certain directions.
How can I contact you?
Ed will, if you give the organizers your email address, they'll pass it on to us and we'll contact you
Shall I put it in the chat?
Fine, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
So I think we still have a little bit more time for a couple of other questions which are there. So I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Michael Shade has asked whether you covered the 1917 Anglo-Russian Military Convention on the site.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It's been asked whether you covered the 1917 Anglo-Russian Military Convention in any of the work on the site.
Yeah, has that been written up? I know about it. Is that written? I don't think that's been written up. No. Now the question, of course, is: would he be interested in doing so? You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Would he be? Does he have detailed knowledge of it? Does he have expert knowledge of it? Would he be interested in writing it up for us? We would. We would be interested.
Super. And I'm going to go to a really interesting question from Mandy King. Asks, what about children? Do we know anything about children in this period?
I wonder why she knows about that. We had I'll take a few minutes to tell you an extraordinary story, which Mandy was at the center of. We heard a long time ago a rumor that there was the Sunday school books of a Sunday school of a cheder. And these Sunday school books of the First World War period by children existed in perfect condition. We are highly skeptical about this. In fact, we went to some of the wrong synagogues. Eventually, we found them. They did exist in pristine condition at what is now Liberal Synagogue in Swiss Cottage in London, St. John's Wood in London. And they had them in a cupboard under the stairs, not in any professional storage, not in any fireproof environment, not any mice or rat-proof environment, in a proverbial classic carton box under the stairs. We asked to see them. There was great reluctance, but eventually they were produced. Someone had paid to have them bound so they weren't falling apart, and someone had paid while they were being bound for them to be digitalized, which was extraordinary. But then they were returned to the cupboard under the stairs, where they languished until we turned up. We then began a process, incredible process, of getting these onto the site. One of the objections came from a member of the synagogue who was a retired law lord, who said he was worried about the infringement of copyright. To which I said in my poshest Glaswegian accent, my good Lord, these are over 100 years old. I don't think the guy's alive. Ah, but you don't know. It's only, there could be, so we have an honorary solicitor who I'm sure expected a quiet life when he expected to be the honorary solicitor, but we put him up against the law lord. He was not amused with this. And eventually persuaded the law lord that if we indemnified the synagogue and we took out an insurance policy, they would allow us to put the books on the site and share them. To which we said, I think this is going a bit over the top. The rabbi of the synagogue did not know the books existed. The chairman of the synagogue was a retired head teacher, an immensely sensible and practical lady who said, this is absolutely ridiculous and getting completely out of control here. Put the books up, ... expletives deleted, and I will deal with his lordship. We uploaded the books. I'll come back to where you can find them. We sent out a press release. We had an enormous press coverage, which Mandy has first-hand knowledge of, which was the Times of Israel, the Daily Telegraph, Jewish Chronicle, enormous amount of press. We did actually have contact, and regional press as well, like London Press and so on. Enormous interest. The books can be found on collections, and they are called the World War in Jewish Children's Eyes, or something like that, or the War Through Jewish Children's Eyes. If you want, if you have, I don't know what time you've got, but Charlotte could quickly find it if you wanted. They are priceless. One of the things, we were contacted by Oxford University, who was doing a project on children's literature of the First World War period, and they were beside themselves. Okay, so here's an example of one of the entries. It's written by children or young adults. You page turn. Page turn. Here, just go to this cursor here, maybe just go to the arrow. Yeah, these are drawings, stories, the cat, etc. What's astonishing is the standard of literacy, standard of writing. I can't write as well as this. Poems, song dedicated to Rabbi Matok, written in July 1915 by Harry Isaacs. And he wrote all this. Extraordinary. I don't know how old he was. Poems now. Lovely stuff. As you can see at the bottom, as you can see, there's 213 pages. And again, letters, poems, essays, and so on. All of which is perfectly readable. There's a Zoom facility and so on. So that's an example of children's literature. There's a question, did any descendants recognize these works? Now that's very interesting, this lady. We were contacted by a lady in her late 70s who said, my grandmother is that lady in the book. She wrote that poem, which caused our solicitor to have an instant heart attack because all they could see was a copyright dispute, to which we calmed him down, spoke to the lady, and she was over the moon about finding this. They got very emotional in the family, I remember. So the answer to the lady's query this morning is yes, a descendant did turn up. We thought we were in for a copyright, being cynical old blokes. A copyright dispute, and in fact she was over the moon and very supportive and wanted to give a speech at the synagogue about it and so on and so on.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alan. Unfortunately, we're now at the end of the session. It's 11:30, although I could hear so much more about those children's stories in particular. If I ask everyone to sort of show their appreciation for Alan's fantastic talk and his discussion of the various elements of the website. Today, it was really illuminating and showed so many different experiences of the war. I just want to remind everybody here that the next session then will take place later today at 6 o'clock. It's called Cyber Heritage, Jewish History in Social Space. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much also for the great questions and comments. And I tried to get through as many as I could in the time that we had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas and Alan and Charlotte in the background there. And for anybody who's coming to the session this evening, just remember that it is the same link as this morning. So you can reuse this morning's link and come back in this evening. And we'll see you all later on.
Thank you.